million people. That is not a statistic from World War II. That is not ancient history. That is the estimated dead toll from an ongoing conflict right now in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and most of you have never seen it trend on Twitter, never saw it break as a news alert, never heard a single politician mention it in a speech. Why? Because the same countries, calling themselves the defenders of democracy, have a financial reason to keep this quiet. Here is what is wild. Congo sits on an estimated $24 trillion worth of minerals, cobalt, coltan, gold, the exact materials powering the phone or laptop you are using to watch this video. And yet, the average Congolese citizen lives on less than $2.5 a day. That gap. That is not an accident. What has been happening in the Congo isn't just a tragedy. It is a system. A deliberate, carefully maintained system. And once you see how it works, you cannot unsee it. To understand what is happening today, you need to go back, way back. Congo is massive. We're talking about a country the size of Western Europe, sitting right in the heart of Africa. The Congo River, the second most powerful river on the planet, cuts straight through it. The rainforest covering its land is the second largest on Earth, after the Amazon. By every measure of natural wealth, this place should be thriving. But here is where the story takes its first dark turn. In 1885, at a conference in Berlin, where, by the way, not a single African leader was invited, European powers carved up the entire continent like it was real estate. Congo was handed personally to King Leopold II of Belgium, not to Belgium as a country, to one man as his private property. What followed was one of the most brutal colonial regimes in human history. The Leopold's forces enslaved the population, forced them to harvest rubber, and mutilated those who didn't meet their quotas. Historians estimate 10 million Congolese died under his rule. 10 million people in the late 1800s and early 1900s, and most of us were never taught that in school. Congo eventually gained independence in 1960. And for one brief moment, there was real hope. The young, charismatic leader named Patrice Lumumba rose to power, promising to finally let Congolese people benefit from their own land. He was assassinated within months. The CIA was later found to have been directly involved, and the man who replaced him, a brutal dictator named Mobutu, kept Western interests protected for the next 3 decades. That pattern, that exact pattern of promise, then sabotage, then control. It never really stopped. Let me ask you something. When did you last charge your phone this morning? An hour ago. Maybe it is charging right now as you watch this inside that battery. Whether it is an iPhone, a Samsung, a Tesla, or a laptop, there is a metal called cobalt. And right now, more than 70% of the world's cobalt comes from one place, the Democratic Republic of Congo. That number alone should stop you cold. Because here's how that cobalt is being extracted. Not in some clean, automated, high-tech facility. We're talking about what locals call crucheurs, artisanal miners, men, women, and in far too many cases, children. Some as young as 6 years old, digging by hand. In tunnels with no structural support, no ventilation, no safety equipment. For sometimes less than $1 a day. The 2016 report by Amnesty International traced cobalt from these mines directly into the supply chains of some of the biggest tech companies on the planet. Apple, Samsung, Sony, Microsoft, companies with billion-dollar diversity reports and sustainability pledges on their websites. And this is where things get uncomfortable. Because this isn't a case of companies not knowing multiple investigations, documentaries, and unreports had already flagged the problem. The information was out there.
Let's see how this ultra-wide lens captures the space.
Cheap,
as we zoom in, the detail in the midground is incredible.
Exploitation, There was very little financial incentive to change anything. Think about that for a second. The reason your phone costs what it costs, part of that calculation involves the suffering of a child in a mine in Kolwezi or Kalami. That is not dramatic language, that is the documented supply chain. And cobalt is just one mineral. We haven't even talked about coltan yet. The mineral inside every single capacitor in every electronic device you own. Congo holds nearly 80% of the world's coltan reserves. Zone country sitting on the materials that power the entire modern world. And its people have almost nothing to show for it. Now, here is where it stops being an economic story and becomes a war story. The Eastern Congo, a region called North Kivu, for the last 3 decades, this area has been in a state of almost constant armed conflict. And when I say armed conflict, I don't mean two sides with a clear dispute that diplomats are trying to resolve. I mean over 120 distinct armed groups, all operating simultaneously in a territory roughly the size of California. 120. Some of these groups have political motivations. Some are ethnic militias with grievances, going back generations. Some are funded by neighboring countries. Rwanda and Uganda have both been accused by UN investigators of directly backing armed factions inside Congo. And some of these groups exist for one reason only: to control the mines. Because whoever controls the mines controls the money. The UN has documented a direct financial pipeline. Armed groups seizing mining territories, taxing or forcing local miners, and selling minerals into the same global supply chains that end up in Western electronics. It is not a theory. It is in the official reports. It has been for years. And the civilians caught in the middle. The numbers are staggering. Since 1996, the conflict in eastern Congo has displaced over 7 million people, making it the largest internal displacement crisis in all of Africa. Entire villages emptied overnight. Women and girls subjected to systematic sexual violence, used as a deliberate weapon of war, a pattern so widespread that Congo has been called the rape capital of the world by investigators, a label that should horrify every single one of us. But what happened next made it even worse. In 2010, the UN deployed one of its loudest peacekeeping missions in history to Congo, known as MONUSCO. 17,000 troops, billions of dollars, and for years, the violence continued almost uninterrupted. Massacres happened within miles of UN bases. Civilians were slaughtered while peacekeepers stayed inside their compounds. In 2022, frustrated and furious, Congolese citizens took to the streets and attacked UN bases directly, demanding the mission leave their country, because to them, the peacekeepers weren't keeping peace. They were just watching. When the people being protected are protesting against their protectors, something has gone catastrophically wrong. And this is where things take a turn, because the failure wasn't just operational. It was political. And the politics lead somewhere very specific. Let's slow down for a moment, because I want to give you the hard numbers. The kind that don't leave you after you close this video. The conflict in Congo is often called the deadliest war since World War II. That is not a blogger's opinion, that is the conclusion of peer-reviewed research, published in journals like The Lancet and cited by the UN. Somewhere between 5.4 and 6 million people have died since 1996. The majority not from direct violence, but from the displacement it causes: disease, starvation, collapsed healthcare. Deaths that don't make for dramatic footage, so they don't make the news. Compare that to conflicts that did dominate global headlines for years. The Syrian civil war, devastating, horrific, claimed an estimated 500,000 lives over more than a decade. That is roughly 1/12 of Congo's death toll. Yet Syria got wall to wall coverage, congressional hearings, presidential speeches. International coalitions, Congo got silence. Now, let's talk about the money, because the money explains the silence. Congo's mineral wealth is estimated at $24 trillion. That is not a typo. $24 trillion sitting in the ground. And in 2022 alone, the country exported over $5 billion worth of minerals. Cobalt, copper, gold, coltan, the vast majority of that value leaving the country in the hands of foreign corporations and corrupt intermediaries. Meanwhile, Congo's GDP per capita sits at around $600 a year, one of the lowest in the entire world. In a country that is, on paper, one of the wealthiest on the planet, that gap between what the land is worth and what the people receive has a name in economics. It is called resource extraction, and historically, it has never happened without powerful external forces making sure the locals can't organize to stop it. Here is another number. The United States imported approximately $900 million worth of cobalt in a single recent year. The European Union passed legislation in 2023, the Critical Raw Materials Act, explicitly listing Congolese cobalt as a strategic priority for European industry. Strategic priority for Europe, not for Congo. And here is perhaps the most damning data point of all. The World Bank and IMF have issued dozens of loans to Congo over the past 4 decades, loans tied to economic reforms that, in practice, opened the country's mining sector further to foreign corporations, while gutting public investment in schools, hospitals, and infrastructure. You lend a drowning man money, they charge him interest on the rope. The numbers don't lie. And when you line them up side by side, the wealth extracted, the lives lost, the aid given versus the props taken, a very clear picture emerges. This wasn't neglect, this was architecture. Here is the part they really don't want you to connect. Every government, every intelligence agency, every multinational corporation operating in or around Congo, they knew, not suspected. Not vaguely heard about, knew in documented, classified, reported detail. Let's go back to 1961. The CIA's involvement in the assassination of Patrice Lumumba wasn't a rumor. It was confirmed by a US Senate investigation in 1975, the Church Committee report. American officials viewed Lumumba as a potential Soviet ally during the Cold War. So they helped remove him and installed Mobutu, a man who would go on to steal an estimated $5 billion from his own country, while Western governments called him a friend and an ally. $5 billion. Stolen with full Western knowledge. But that was the Cold War, right? Ancient history. Let's talk about 2002. The UN published our landmark report, documenting how multinational companies, including firms from the United States, Belgium, Germany, and the UK, were directly financing armed groups in Congo in exchange for mining access. The report named names. It listed companies, and almost nothing happened. A handful of firms were quietly investigated. A few issued statements. The supply chains were slightly reshuffled. Same minerals, different paperwork, and within a few years, business was back to normal. But here is the twist that truly reframes everything. In 2010, the United States passed the Dodd-Frank Act, specifically Section 1502, which required American companies to audit their supply chains for conflict minerals from Congo. It was landmark legislation. It was working. Independent researchers found it was beginning to reduce armed group revenues from mining. And then, in 2017, the ESC under the Trump administration suspended enforcement of that rule. Suspended, meaning companies no longer had to verify where their minerals came from. The one piece of legislation specifically designed to cut the financial lifeline to armed groups in Congo quietly switched off. Why? Because compliance was expensive for corporations, because auditing supply chains cut into margins, because in the calculation of Washington policy, the profit of American industry outweighed the lives of Congolese civilians. That is not a radical interpretation. That is the documented sequence of events. And this is where things take a genuinely dark turn, because it is not just the United States. China has invested over $7 billion in Congolese mining infrastructure in recent years through opaque government-to-government deals that independent auditors have almost no access to. Meanwhile, Chinese companies now control a significant portion of Congo's cobalt output. The West extracted Congo for a century. Now there is a new player at the table, and the Congolese people are still not sitting in the chair. Every major power on Earth has looked at Congo and asked the same question. Not how do we help, but how do we get our share? Now, I want to be fair here, because some of you are already thinking it. But companies have ethical sourcing programs now. Apple publishes a supplier responsibility report every year.
Welcome to the Tesla factory, where innovation meets precision.
Pledged to
Here, our
eliminate
vehicles are
cobalt
assembled
from its
with
battery.
cutting-edge technology.
The EU has new regulations. Things are getting better, right? And honestly, that is a fair pushback. Let's actually look at it. Yes, some progress exists. Battery technology is slowly evolving. Certain automakers are genuinely investing in cobalt, reduced chemistries. A handful of NGOs have set up monitoring programs in specific mining regions. These things are real, and they deserve acknowledgement. But here is the problem with calling it progress. When Apple publishes a supplier responsibility report, they are auditing their direct suppliers, the companies they write checks to, but cobalt doesn't travel in a straight line. It moves through a chain of middlemen, local traders, regional brokers, processing facilities, before it ever reaches a certified supplier. By the time it gets there, it has been laundered through enough paperwork that tracing it back to a specific mine is nearly impossible. This is not speculation. A 2021 investigation by the Washington Post found that even suppliers who had passed ethical audits were receiving minerals that originated from child labor mines. The audits weren't failing by accident. The system was designed with just enough complexity to make clean hands plausible. That is not reform. That is the appearance of reform. And ethical sourcing as a concept carries a deeper problem. It places the moral burden entirely on the supply chain. It asks how we extract, never whether we extract. It optimizes the machine without questioning whether the machine should exist in its current form. Here is a sharper question. If a Congolese-led government tomorrow said, "We are nationalizing our mineral sector. All extraction profits stay in Congo. Foreign companies can apply for licenses under our terms." How do you think Western governments would respond? We already know the answer. We saw it in 1961 with Lumumba. We saw it play out across Latin America, the Middle East, and Southeast Asia throughout the 20th century. Every time a resource-rich nation has tried to take sovereign control of its own wealth, the reaction from powerful external interests has been swift, coordinated, and rarely peaceful. So when we talk about ethical sourcing, we have to be honest about the ceiling on that conversation, because real ethics wouldn't just mean cleaner supply chains. It would mean Congo keeping its own wealth. And that conversation, the one about genuine sovereignty, genuine economic justice, that one almost never makes it into the corporate sustainability report. So here we are. You now know that the deadliest conflict since World War II has been unfolding for nearly 3 decades, with the full awareness of the most powerful governments and corporations on Earth. You know that the minerals fueling that conflict are sitting inside the device you used to find this video. You know that the legislation designed to address it was quietly suspended. You know that every reform offered so far has been carefully designed to change just enough so that nothing fundamental has to change at all. And I want to leave you with one thought. There is a concept in moral philosophy called the bystander effect. The idea that the more people witness a crisis, the less likely any individual feels responsible for acting. Because if everyone knows, then surely someone else is handling it. Surely the governments know. Surely the corporations are fixing it. Surely the UN is on the ground. But we've just spent 8 minutes documenting exactly what happens when everyone assumes someone else is responsible. 6 million people. The question isn't whether you care. You are still watching, so you clearly do. The question is what caring actually looks like when the problem is this embedded, this profitable, and this deliberately obscured. Does it mean pressuring the brands in your pocket to publish full mineral traceability, not just supplier audits? Does it mean voting for legislators who won't quietly suspend the one law that was actually working? Does it mean demanding that media organizations cover a 6 million person death toll with the same urgency they give a 3-day political scandal? Maybe all of it, maybe none of it feels like enough. But here is what I know for certain. Ignorance was always their greatest tool. The moment enough people understand exactly how this system works and refuse to look away, the calculation changes. You just took that first step. The question is, what do you do next?